Well, the Patton Museum has an interesting story. It was organized in 1949, formed around a collection of equipment that General Patton had sent back to the States for evaluation. And over the years, it became known worldwide as the Patton Museum of Cavalry and Armor. But one of the interesting things about that story is after the Army moved the armor training mission to Fort Benning, Georgia, the entire museum collection went with it in 2012. They gave the Army an opportunity to open a completely new facility, and instead of being dedicated to a branch or a certain piece of the Army, it became dedicated to telling the story of leadership and a platform for leadership instruction. It is going to be a facility to train ROTC cadets, for one thing. It's going to be part of the curriculum of the cadets. So these future Army officers are going to be learning firsthand, using artifacts, the Patton story and other stories of leadership, about leadership and about dealing with people and using history as that basis. The museum's collection has significant exhibits in it, many more than just things that belong to General Patton. Some examples, and they're all story-based. This museum now has the Army's fire truck that was on duty at the Pentagon on 9/11. This truck was parked literally a couple of hundred yards from the point of impact of that airplane. It's damaged. It is a one-of-a-kind vehicle, one-of-a-kind artifact and piece of equipment that you will not see anywhere in the world outside of the National 9/11 Memorial in New York City, or maybe a visit to the Pentagon or to Shanksville, Pennsylvania. But here in Kentucky is foam truck number 161, the truck that was at the Pentagon. This is a very unique piece of equipment, and the Museum Foundation is raising money now to build an exhibit around it. The Korean War, of course, Patton was no longer living at that time. But look at a leadership decision around an exhibit of what do you do, and you're trying to evacuate your soldiers out of North Korea after the Chinese attacked in 1950. You're the commander, and yet not only do you have to get your own soldiers out and your own people, several thousand Korean refugees are on the docks looking at your ships. Entire families wanting to avoid what might happen to them with Chinese and North Koreans bearing down on them. What do you do now, General? Do you take those refugees with you? Do you possibly have to keep some of your own resources, some of your own equipment behind? What do you do? Stories like this are what makes this museum unique. It gets out of just the pure visit to look at a piece of hardware, and it gives depth and breadth to the story and to the people that the artifacts represent. Patton's history, everything he was as a leader and as a general, was based on his family. Patton's grandfather was killed in the Civil War. A visitor can stand in one place in this museum and see a collection of saddles, and take those saddles and look at the saddle that Patton's grandfather owned during the Civil War. Look at the saddle that was on the riderless horse at Patton's funeral. These are within just feet of each other. What does that mean? A family, a life, a death, and everything that went in between it. Look just a few yards away, and there's a saddle that Patton brought back from Mexico in 1916 with the blood of one of Pancho Villa's chief lieutenants on it. Patton was an Olympian. He was a modern pentathlete in the 1912 Olympics in Stockholm. The museum has Patton's Olympic uniform, his swimming suit, a sweater he wore. Now it's about people. So what the museum does now is it doesn't just display Patton's famous ivory-handled pistols, for example, as a piece of Army hardware or as something that belonged to Patton, and that's a neat story in itself. But for example, now what it tells about is the symbol. So you learn what the symbology of leadership is, and you learn that Patton carried those pistols for many reasons, but one was to show young soldiers in World War II that he had been in combat because he used these pistols. Longer-term plans for the museum by the Army and the Patton Museum Foundation are to turn the museum into the Patton Center of Leadership. And that will enable the museum to run programs for outside groups, business, academic, various organizations to come in and use and learn from the museum's collection. The museum has a complete audio-visual outfitted conference facility and the capability to teach and educate any number of people on leadership, not just the Army, but on the human dimension of leadership in general. The Army doesn't have a monopoly on leadership, really. I mean, there are great stories and great things and lessons in business leadership, sports leadership, other facets, and this is a platform for that. It's a great place to bring a family. It's a great place for kids to learn, for young adults to learn, for all ages to experience the collection and the story here.
I'm sitting on a wooden footlocker, and my arm is resting on a steel bunk. The date stamp on this bunk is 10 October 1940, and that takes us back to the beginning of this story, because we're also inside a 63-man World War II barracks. This barracks is a 1941 version that was built here at Fort Knox. In 1941, when they first built them, they were expected to last for 5 years. And at the end of the war, they were still building them, but then they stopped. And most of these kind of went into mothballs for a while. But then in June of 1950, when the North Koreans came across the 38th parallel, these barracks were put back into use and refurbished a bit so that we could mobilize for another war. And then all during the Vietnam War, they were used. So they've lasted for a long time, but during the Vietnam War, about the middle of the war, they started tearing these old buildings down. I've been on the Patton Museum Board of Directors for 15 years. And during that whole time, all of us old soldiers that serve around here realized that there is value to this old building and that we need to save it. We need to save it for history. So we came back to General Franklin and said, if you will move this building and put it on the Patton Museum campus, we will raise the money and we will provide a workforce, and we will do this building. And that's what we agreed to do. And so General Franklin lived up to what his part of it, and in May of 2011, this building that I'm in right now was moved 7.5 miles across post and placed on the Patton Museum campus. This old building, I've used a primary workforce from a Bluegrass Challenge Academy. They come here for 6 months, and after they've been here for a couple months, they start doing volunteer work. And I've used them as a primary workforce. I've gone through 4 classes of those kids, and they have been excellent workers if we put this back together. I couldn't find everything that I needed for this, like the bunk that I'm leaning on. I looked for 2 years for bunks like this, couldn't find them. And one day, a retired sergeant major from Ohio called me and said, I found the bunks at Camp Perry, Ohio. We brought them back here, sandblasted them, had them painted, and now they look like they did in 1940-41. I couldn't find the plumbing. I wanted authentic plumbing in the latrine. I couldn't find that either. And then just out of nowhere, one day a guy from Owensboro called. Said, I understand you want plumbing for your barracks. I said, I sure do. He said, I think I found it down at old Camp Breckenridge. And the story of that is interesting in itself, because there was a Spec 4 draftee here at Fort Knox back in the 60s. And he took some leave, went home and bought about 400 acres of old Camp Breckenridge. And he had 3 barracks like this on his property. And inside, I found the plumbing that I needed to make us an authentic latrine, with the right sinks, the right commodes, the right urinal, and even a concrete deep sink. If you want to look at the essence of this old building and realize why some of us were so passionate about saving this, all you have to do is look at the steps going up to the 2nd floor. Because they're all made out of oak, and when they were first put in here, the edges of them were straight across the corner, just like a piece of wood. If you look at them today, you'll see that they're rounded on the front edge, and there's a concave on the flat part of it. And that was caused by the footsteps of soldiers who trained here before they went to World War II. It's the footsteps of soldiers who trained here before they went to Korea. It's the footsteps of soldiers that trained here before they went to Vietnam. And that's the essence of this building. That's what this means. This building is all around the footprints of those soldiers and the sacrifices that they made and what it meant to them and what it means to us today to be able to preserve this building and show it to generations to come.
My name is Vestal Rogers. I'm portraying a color sergeant for the 9th Michigan Volunteer Infantry. The 9th Michigan Infantry came down here in October 28th of 1861, and they started construction on this fort on November the 3rd, 1861. The Confederates were harassing and doing a lot of damage on the railroads in the area, and General William Tecumseh Sherman, he wanted to have a better supply line that could be protected, so he ordered this fort built here to protect his supply base in West Point. And due to the fort being here, the supply line never got interrupted. The Michigan soldiers remained here until the spring of 1862, then they were sent south, and they actually fought with Sherman all the way to Atlanta. It's actually an earthen fort which would withstand the cannon fire. The walls from the trench out front were about 17 feet high, and the walls were about 9 feet wide at the top. 4 soldiers could walk side by side on top of the wall. From the inside of the fort, you would see the wooden wall that they backfilled the dirt against. And from the outside of the fort, all you would see would be the dirt walls. It's 1,000 feet from one end to the other. And they had clear-cut all these trees for over a mile in all directions. So if an enemy soldier got within a mile of this place, he'd probably already been in somebody's gun sight. This fort was strategically placed in this area. This is on Pierman Hill, which sits about 300 feet above the town of West Point. And the fort faces away from the town. It faces the south. The old roads come in from the south. And with the trees being cut, then it was a definite advantage to being able to protect everything. The soldiers, they suffered quite a bit of hardships. They were up here and the weather turned bad real quickly, and a lot of them became ill real quickly, and they died up here in the first 2 months during the construction from disease. They were drinking water out of the rivers. It wasn't pure. They had a lot of dysentery and typhoid. The men from West Point were off in the south. They were fighting for the Confederate Army. Most of the people in the town were pro-Confederate, but the town was occupied by Union troops. But even at that, the ladies formed aid societies over there, and they set up some hospitals and houses over there, and they nursed a lot of these young soldiers back to health, hoping somebody would take care of their men wherever they might be. Now, Fort Duffield is still pretty much intact, the earthen walls. Of course, the wooden walls on the interior have rotted away over 150 years. But we have volunteers, Friends of Fort Duffield and the Fort Duffield Heritage Society. We maintain the fort, and we keep the grass mowed, and we have living history programs here. We have one living history program on Memorial Day, and we also have one on the first Sunday in November to commemorate the construction of it, starting the construction. And we have reenactors up here, both Union and Confederate. And we do living history. We get up close and personal with people. You can come visit the camps. We have a camp set up, so we show you about the life of the soldier and the uniforms and the weapons and things of that nature. We give school tours here. Boy Scouts come up here and camp out, and they help a lot with just general cleanup and maintaining the park. Fort Duffield is open year-round to the general public. The park actually opens at daylight and closes at dark.
Residents of Radcliff was asked by our chairman, Sam Young, while visiting back home, if they would be interested in putting up a 9/11 memorial to be dedicated on the 10th anniversary. A committee was formed of 12 people, one of the members was Chuck Heater, who is the administrator here at Kentucky Veterans Cemetery. He deeded us this plot of land. When we got together, we didn't have any funding. This project was built with kind services from patriots, business folks, and just other veterans that came together. We had 6 weeks to build this, and we just rallied as patriots and veterans to do such. The main feature, which is a beam from the North Tower, it stands 22 foot tall, and that was what we dedicated that day. And I'm sitting on a reflection seat that has all the branches of the service and also the logos of the New York Fire Department and the New York Police Department, because they pay such a sacrifice as first responders, and the men and women that later went to Afghani and the Iraqi wars. If it wasn't for 9/11, we wouldn't have been in those countries. A little less than a year after we erected and the foundation and laid the bricks, we were given the opportunity to secure stones from the Pentagon, damaged stones that they were giving away. Well, we looked at financing for the back wall and we didn't have it. And we came up with the idea, what better wall could it be than the actual stones from 9/11? And it's a beautiful structure. And it reminds us, along with the feature, daily of what happened that day. I really didn't have the impact on the 10th anniversary of what it meant, because we were just so focused on building it. You know, we were going for a joyous occasion, although it was not a joyous occasion, but the fact of meeting our goals, meeting our schedule, that we would achieve this. This memorial was erected 2 days before the dedication. On that day, we had well over 3,000 people attend. It was a joyous occasion. It was proposed that we go to the state, since it stands 22 foot tall and is a magnificent character, to see some of the local representatives. On February 12th, 2013, they made it the first official 9/11 memorial for the state of Kentucky. We will eventually take every man and woman to date that have lost their lives, and we've had 2 women that have lost their lives in Iraq. We want to honor them and have them on the 2 wing walls that we're trying to build at this time. They're made out of black granite. Every committee member donates their time. We pay to play. We don't get paid for what we do. We do this out of our heart and compassion for our country. It's nestled here in the Kentucky Veterans Cemetery, and it's hallowed grounds. It is just peaceful here. You couldn't pick a better spot to put this memorial. We all know where we were that day. Everybody knows where they were on 9/11. And we built it as a tribute to those first responders and the people that lost their lives, not just in the World Trade Center, the 2 towers, but also in Pentagon, also in Flight 93. We're going to honor them. We're going to honor the whole nation for what happened that day.
The Saunders Springs Nature Preserve is built on, or is part of, what used to be the water plant that produced the drinking water for Fort Knox and Radcliff. And when it no longer could meet the production needs, the water district that owned it turned the property over to the city of Radcliff. And pretty much from the mid-90s until now, we have been developing the area into a nature preserve by building pavilions, recreational facilities, nature trails, walking trails, biking trails for the use by people here in the local area. Part of what makes Saunders Springs so unique is the variety of activities that are here. Not only is the flora and the fauna, the plants and the trees just hugely diverse because of the nature of the terrain, but we have recently located 3 cabins, log cabins, which are historically linked to Radcliff at the very, very entrance. We've built several pavilions, obviously restroom facilities, trails all over the location. The reservoir, which used to service the water plant, has been stocked with fish, and we have lots of fishing going on here. So in addition to the walking and hiking and biking, just to come out and enjoy the absolutely gorgeous terrain that is here is what draws most people. The Saunders Springs Nature Preserve, strangely, is a square 1,000 foot on a side. It's about a 26-acre area, a small area. Several years ago, Fort Knox leased to the city the land adjacent to it, another 75 acres, with a specific direction to provide some biking, hiking, nature trails. And in this new area here, we have now built more than 7 miles of trails. The terrain is gently rolling and ideal for not only the individual hiker and the runner, but those who like to use mountain bikes. These trails are adapted for them, and we have just built a mountain biking skills training area for the beginning and the intermediate biker to learn, if you will, the techniques that they need to safely operate on these trails, as well as trails in other locations around the area. What I like personally most about it is just the gorgeous terrain, whether it is in the fall with the foliage, and we're talking about hardwood forests, so the color differentiation with the maples and the hickories are just gorgeous. And in spring with all the dogwoods and the redbuds, it's just ablaze with flowers. And in the late spring with all the wildflowers, and because of the differences in the terrain, there's just a huge variance in what is out here to look at. And of course, animals running everywhere. I think they've gotten the word already that this is a nature preserve, and they're free to run around, and it's just cool just to see the deer and the coyotes and the red foxes bounding around the area. One of the things that we've been able to do is to offer schools that want to have field trips, science-oriented field trips, the ability to come out here, and we organize for these schools and activities a full range of science-based activities using subject matter experts, which we draw in to talk about the animals, how a water plant operated before, stormwater management, forestry management, a host of services for the schools. And typically 100, 150 kids at a time show up for a full day's worth of physical activities, roaming over the preserve, as well as learning, hopefully, hands-on some of the unique things that only Saunders Springs has to offer. Almost all of the effort that has been put into developing the preserve has been done by volunteers from schools and scouting units, you name it. Everybody seems to want to help. This has really been a labor of love by literally hundreds of volunteers over the years at almost no cost to the local community. There is no entry fee into Saunders Springs. It is open pretty much 7 days a week, year-round, with the exception of some severe weather. So it's close in, no cost, open all the time. It is just a unique asset.